Hey, welcome back to our next session, Going Big, the Business and Art of Long-Form Storytelling. Over the past 2 to 3 years, actually, we've had panel discussions on kind of the dearth of feature-length family films coming out of Canada, especially English Canada, here at TIFF Kids. And this year we decided to take a bit of a different approach, and we wanted to feature guest speakers who have recently or are currently involved in the development and execution production of independent family feature films that had or are designed to have a wide theatrical release in North America. I'm extremely proud that we managed to pull together this panel of expert producers, writers, and directors to talk about the financing, development, and production process for family films in North America. So we have Michael Hirsch and Patricia Rosema are currently developing a feature film adaptation of Robert Munsch's beloved children's book, Paperback Princess. Welcome, Patricia and Michael. We have Bob Barlin and Cal Brunker, who created last year's animated feature film hit Escape from Planet Earth that was released by the Weinstein Company in the US. Welcome, Cal and Bob. And we have Peter Lepiniotis, who co-wrote and directed this year's highly successful Korean-Canadian co-production, The Nut Job. And I think that has been greenlit already to a second sequel. We had a last-minute moderator change for this session, and I'm really happy that Peter Moss stepped in to lead this discussion. Peter, thank you so much, and over to you.
So without further ado, we don't have a whole lot of time, and there's some incredibly interesting stories. So we'd like to discuss it as project by project and talk about how the ideas gave birth to the script, and the script gave birth to the production plan, and where they are in the process. So over to Michael and Patricia, and at the end of it, we'll have a Q&A, and you can participate.
Thank you, Peter. Patricia seemed to want to leave the floor. I'm not sure why, but...
Please turn off all cell phones.
Yes, absolutely. So Paperback Princess is, a great book by Robert Munsch, published by Annick Press, and is a book that has sold tens of millions of books around the world. About 80% of the sales have been in North America, or actually in the US versus Canada, and the majority of those books have been sold in North America. So big Canadian success story. It's one that most children in our country know. It's fairly well known in the US and popular around the world. And that was the basis for sort of starting this project, because I was looking for something that was popular, already known, so that you could build a feature film from a successful brand and continue to build on that, potentially developing merchandising and licensing out of the whole property. So the first step was actually, I'm going to tell you the story actually of sort of how this project has developed and where we are. We started developing this about 3 years ago, and the first step was perfecting the rights. So at the time, I was running a company called Cookie Jar, and we had a lot of rights to Paperback Princess because those rights had previously been at Cinar, which was a company we acquired. And so we approached Rich Wilkes, the publisher from Annick Press, who's here today. Rich, do you want to stand up? Okay, great. He's waving. Sought a discussion about increasing our rights. And because we wanted to do a feature film and we wanted to have more merchandising rights, we needed to renegotiate our deal. And the author of the books, Robert Munsch, who's one of Canada's best-known children's authors, had a very specific idea in mind, and we were told he wants it to be a live-action movie with an animated dragon. And at the beginning, I had set out and wanted to do an animated movie because, you read the book, you think this should be animated, etc. And it took me a while to sort of get comfortable with the idea of doing a live-action feature with it. And what really sort of, I think, triggered the change in my mind and made me more comfortable with it was the fact that Ellen Page was after the book herself, and that we were competing for the rights with her. What we decided to do was work with Ellen and build the movie around her as the princess. She would join as an executive producer, and we would develop the script, and she would have input throughout. And so the first question that we had to deal with once we had sort of, finalized the rights and had, all the rights that we needed to develop this as a live action movie, the next point that we attacked was who's going to write it. And in thinking about the writer, I felt strongly that we should have a writer-director, that we needed to make sure that we had a strong vision for this piece that would sort of continue through the whole production, and that it wasn't just going to be get a script, then get a director. And so it's obvious because Patricia Rosema is sitting beside me, and she often corrects my pronunciation of her name. But in any case, so Patricia is one of Canada's finest writer-directors. She's a writer and a director of vision. Has worked in the area of fantasy, has worked in kids programming, having produced a motion picture called Kit Kittredge, All-American Girl. And I met with her, and I think we decided that we could do this together. And so we embarked on the journey of how to adapt The Paper Bag Princess, which is a very short book, a book that can be told in about 10 minutes easily, or 10 or less. Okay, it can be told in 10 minutes or less. And what we would do to develop it into a longer feature. So I'm going to turn this over now to Patricia, who will tell you about her journey developing the script, and then we'll pick up on what was next.
Yeah, I had kids, and that, I'm sure many of you do, that inspires you to honor them some way in your productive, in your creative life. So I made my family film, and I was happy with that, and I thought, okay, that's that. And then Michael came along with Paper Bag and with Ellen Page, and it was completely instinctive. I thought, perfect, I'll do that. And the question was how. Live action was exciting to me. The idea of a, animated dragon was exciting to me. I thought immediately of a contemporary world, and I thought, Paper Bag Princess, what does that mean? I know, her father owns a paper bag empire. He makes paper bags, and then she's the heir to this. So I had this whole, and I wrote many drafts in that direction. In the end, a good friend of mine who reads everything read it and said, you have two beautiful scripts here in this one script. You have to pick one. You either have to go with the, kind of the mythology of the princess and the king and the queen and all that, or you have to do a contemporary piece, but they weren't sitting comfortably together. And I had many notes from Rich and from Robert. I was involved, and it was very important to me that he liked what we were doing, and so many drafts later I had to chuck that and then sort of started over, and now it's more classical, but it's unhinged in, I think, a really wonderful way. It's got almost, Monty Python-esque going way back, but in terms of its absurdity and
a little bit of Princess Bride inspiration.
Also going way back. So, very, quite, like it has a voiceover who's a little guy who carries around his little amp, and it's his job to be the princess's voiceover, but he hates being a voiceover, but his whole family was a voiceover, and he's got voiceover union issues, and so he's the buddy, right? And he's intrusive, and he doesn't understand what she's thinking at all, so they have a constant battle about that. So, it's got little fourth wall fun, but at its heart, I think it's really moving. It took a long time for me to. We did many drafts and finally found something that people seem to be responding to. So we were just a couple of weeks ago in the offices of the Columbia and where else? Universal, and doing the pitch. So
I'm going to go back a step. When Patricia got the script right, the next phase that we went to was designing the dragon. If it were totally an animated piece, we would have designed as we were going. We would have been doing designs early on. But we decided that we needed to show prospective investors in the film And the other thing I should note is that the film is going to be about a $50 million picture. So it's early on we were thinking of doing it as perhaps a lower budget $10 million kind of picture, but as it evolved, I certainly felt that unless we made it in a way that it was competitive with other movies, that it didn't make a lot of sense to actually make it.
And Michael was great, if I could just interrupt you with a compliment. But, I was trying to make it cheap, which was my low-budget contemporary sort of thing, and keep the dragon not very much part of it. And I was trying to make it doable. I really wanted to make it possible. And Michael just said, write the thing you want to see. Don't think about money. Just write the thing you want to see. And I almost had to be dragged into that. And he's a big vision guy. And I think completely right. I think that's
so
why it's people are responding to it now.
So if you could throw up the picture of Ellen and the dragon. There it is. Maybe it was up before, I don't know.
No, it wasn't.
Okay. So in any case, a lot of work went into this. Philip Stamp, who is... So this project, by the way, sits now at DHX because Cookie Jar combined with DHX about a year and a half ago. And Philip Stamp runs our 3D CGI studio in Halifax, and is a terrific, designer, director himself. And he worked with some artists to develop the dragon, which I think has turned out great. We think that the dragon captures, a multiple, complicated personality that we were looking for. A dragon that could be fierce, but it could also be friendly and could, show this multifaceted personality that Patricia had written. So we're really quite happy.
It goes through quite transitions, more than in the book, obviously. The book slots very accurately, actually, right into the middle of the movie. So I've written a giant prologue and a giant epilogue to the book itself, and the language, the dialogue, everything in the book is exactly the same. So I feel kind of proud of that I didn't have to sort of violate the essential drama of what's been so beloved. But the dragon sort of figures largely in the final thing. He become, well, I don't want to say.
So where we are, let me just finish the story of where we are. So we now have a design aesthetic for the movie. We've got a script that we like. We've got a star cast, and joining us as executive producer as well. And we're out pitching the studios and financiers to see if we can fund the deficit of the picture, which is about half the cost of the movie in terms of that's what's remaining to be sort of financed. And the whole project has been one that was tremendously time-consuming. I think that we've been, we were probably 2.5 years in the writing process. I'm just guessing by memory. And we were certainly 6 months to a year in designing the dragon and getting it to the point where we were happy with it. And having done all that and having now budgeted it and worked the script over and over again, we're at that moment where we need to finance the picture. But if we didn't want to go out and try to pre-sell it or pre-finance it without having all of this, because we felt it was incomplete and just wouldn't make any sense. So we now have a big enough package and enough detail there so that we can actually either get funded or not. We're obviously hopeful that we will. And we're excited about the prospect of making the movie sometime in the next year. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about, just in terms of, I can see that you are 50% financed. From the beginning of the concept to say it's the paper bag princess to here, how did that funding work and where did that come from and what kind of support you had?
Sure. So the obvious part of the funding is the Canadian portion in tax credits. So, that immediately is 30% plus, right, given, depending upon where we shoot and various details. And then Telefilm Canada is expected to come in with a meaningful investment, and the piece clearly is one that they're quite interested and excited by. And the other money would come from a Canadian distributor and OMDC and all the various agencies, and then some pre-sales.
And that's the initial 50%.
Yes.
But what got you from going after the rights to here?
Okay.
What kind of
So
financing?
we did get help from
develop?
We got some help. Actually, initially this project started with CBC, who at that point wanted to do some family movies. So they were actually starting up a family movie section. And so we started that way, and we were originally thinking of the lower budget version. But that particular plan ended, and CBC hasn't continued that program. And then we got some additional money from Telefilm Canada, and we got some additional money from the Harold Greenberg Fund. And then we've put up our own resources as well at DHX.
Cookie Jar and DHX.
Yes.
That's great.
And Patricia has been very generous with her time. So, it's really been a partnership. Ellen's been generous with her time, and everybody's worked on this thing. It's I'd say it's a labor of love, and nothing would make us happier than to see it go in front of the cameras.
That's great. Escape from Planet Earth.
Sure. Well,
again, from idea to screen. Tell us the journey.
Is this on? Yep, we're good. So we've got a pretty different approach to this thing. The history of Escape from Planet Earth is they had it's a Weinstein film. They had another creative team entirely on the film that ran for a couple of years and ended up at a roadblock. And it was a full kind of creative leadership change when we came in. And it was my first movie as a director, and I'd been working very hard for a long time to kind of set myself up in that position. I'd done story work on Despicable Me and Ice Ages and Horton Hears a Who and a lot of other movies. I ran a commercial studio in Toronto called Red Rover Studios for a few years. And I was working towards this on a bunch of kind of parallel tracks, trying to go which one of these is going to break so that I can actually get a chance to start directing movies. And when this came up, it came up very quickly. Rainmaker, the studio that produced the film, were tasked with, okay, we've spent these years and this X amount of budget. How do we go? Where do we go from here to actually get this thing over the finish line? And it happened quickly. It was like a Monday, I got a call from them. I'd never worked with them before, but we'd met and chatted about some projects, and they said, can you fly down to New York in the morning and pitch Harvey Weinstein your version of the movie? And I said, absolutely. Got to figure out what that version of the movie is. So I kind of went home and started poring over the script and thought, here are the things I would do. And so flew down. That was a pretty wild meeting. Harvey's a pretty passionate guy, and I was just some kid from Canada. And so I came in, and I still think of myself as a kid from Canada. I'm like almost an old man.
It's a Canadian thing.
That's right. And so I was kind of sat down at the table with him, and he was talking about his vision for the film and some things that he saw. And obviously, him and his brother Bob have quite a passionate relationship, and that was key to our story as well. And so he was really excited about the brothers thing. And about 10 minutes into this meeting, I thought, I'm going to be directing this thing. I got to speak up and say something. But he's like a freight train, so you gotta kind of go, okay, here's my chance. And I jumped in. I was like, what about this? And he looked over at me with this look like, who are you and what are you doing in this meeting? And I kind of shrunk down in my seat, and he got back up to speed again and kept going. And I thought, all right, I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna swing for the fence, and he's either gonna kick me out of the room now, or this is gonna be. So I jumped in again. I was like, and we could do this and this and this. And he turned and went, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And from then on, we were it was okay. So it was with him and working with his team you kind of have to commit all the way. We ended up kind of working 70 hours a week for 2.5 years on the movie, which it became your whole life. Within a week of that meeting, I had packed up and moved out to Vancouver for 2.5 years. Just bought a house here and all sorts of other things. So it was that world for me, and Bob's story is similar. I'll get to that in a minute. It ended up being one of those things that when you get your shot, you realize it and you drop everything. And the guys who own Red Rover Studios were incredibly supportive. You know, I talked to them and they thought, oh my God, what a headache. You're leaving us kind of in the lurch, but what are you gonna do? These chances just don't come up very much. So they got behind that, and that's amazing. We still have a great relationship, and they were entirely supportive. So the next level of drama, 1 week later, I'm there, and they'd hired a writer to take a crack at the script, and I showed up on my first day of work with, you know, my suitcases and everything, and the script arrived, and it was a disaster, and I was thinking, oh no, this is my first real test as a director. How do you say this is terrible but not cancel the movie at the same time? So trying to navigate that. And we got on a call, and the first thing they said is, we hate the script, so what do we do? And I said, well, you know, my background's in story. I've done a lot of writing. I haven't written a feature before, but I work with a writing partner that I would love to bring out, and just let us pitch you an outline and show you in storyboards the kind of plan for this thing. They said, okay, no problem. And I called up Bob, who was working at that same commercial studio, and said, can you get on a plane and just take a week's vacation, just come out here and write this outline for me? So he came out with a couple shirts and a backpack, and we came home 2.5 years later. So
it was a long vacation. So.
Yes. So it ended up being a pretty tumultuous beginning to that. And I should mention, only in case there are people in the audience who are, you know, potentially approaching it from the creative side and thinking about, you know, the juggle between stability and chasing your dreams. I left all of these positions in Toronto and a kind of well-established career. I was given 3 weeks guaranteed work at the beginning of the movie to leave all these things and pack up and move out. And I think it would have been a pretty different story if it had fallen apart on me, but it didn't. And I only share that because I think it's one of those things where there are so few of these things made that if you get a chance, you kind of have to go all in on it and give it a shot, because that phone doesn't ring very often, and when it does, I guess you got to pick it up. So that's the genesis. I'll let Bob talk about the beginning, but we can talk about the process after.
Sure thing. I mean, just to springboard off that, the first 3 months, basically, in terms of the writing and the storyboarding, because we were writing and boarding concurrently, we would be writing pages every day and staying until midnight or 1 a.m. at the studio, because the storyboard artist would have nothing to work on. And at the end of every week, we were sending that stuff to the Weinstein Company, kind of with basically the film hanging in the balance of, like, are we going to keep this going for another week? Are we going to keep this going for another week? And we did that for 3 months, basically, until we had a full animatic setup of the first act, which we then took down to New York, screened for the Weinsteins, and based on that, the film was greenlit. But it was definitely the same type of situation where it was pretty nebulous whether or not this would continue on. So we just kind of went all in and doubled down and said, well, you know, might as well, what, are we not going to work until 1 a.m.? This could be our last week making a movie. And so we jumped in, and yeah, thankfully they liked what we were doing and kept on working, and that ultimately ended up in a movie that came out in theaters.
So I think to move on to the process, which I hope that's interesting. I think that's the thing we can talk about. We're definitely not the experts in terms of financing and putting these things together, so we'll talk about what we know. Our process is, we've been writing together for a long time, and the nuts and bolts of how we approach this stuff is we generally talk out the outline as a whole, and then we go through, and this is kind of nuts and bolts, but hopefully it's helpful. We go through and we just break it out into scenes. We give them little acronyms or single, like, 1 or 2 word descriptions so that we know what scene we're talking about. Then we just divide them up, and Bob will write one, I'll write one, then we'll stop, we'll switch, we'll read them out. We always read each other's work. We never read our own work so that we can hear it fresh to ourselves. And then we'll rewrite each other, and then it goes in, and we kind of go through the whole script in that kind of fashion. We've got to the point where we have no problem. We don't have to couch our words with, well, you know, I think it could really be. We don't have to waste time like that anymore, because we both are, and it's not to say that one should be brutal. Until you develop that level of trust with somebody, it's a very dangerous thing to come in too hard with notes, because you just shatter people's hearts, and that's not a good thing. But we have enough trust built up between us that we just go, that's not working, but let's do this. And we both do that to each other. So once we get the full script up on its feet, we do a full read from beginning to end, and then we re-outline. And I think the reason we do that is there's something that happens when you're writing pages, which is discovery, that never happens when you're outlining. You can outline till you're blue in the face, but when you start into a scene and you start imagining people talking to each other, all sorts of dynamics start to come up that you didn't plan for. And we try and make space for that, knowing that it's going to make a mess and it's going to need to go back to outline again and kind of re-plan out how this fits together. And then the next draft is the one we share with people. So that's kind of big picture.
Yeah, that brings it into the first draft. And I think one of the other things, just even working on a scene level, something that we'll do in terms of reading it out loud, we often take it a next step and we'll actually record ourselves. Like we have a recording booth in our office and we'll just actually do the dialogue out loud and then cut it together just as a radio play, because there's so many things where when you're writing, it sounds, you think it will sound good, and then just it's that act of hearing it out loud and thinking that a character is going to have to say this, a person is going to have to be saying this, in the case of animation in a voiceover booth, and just finding dialogue that really is going to work and sound natural, and jokes that'll work and be funny. And so that just helps us get to ultimately a first draft that is going to hopefully bring people on board. I mean, with our case, it was a lot of that's what went out, and that's what we were using with the artwork to try and land the cast and try and have people look at this and start reading it. And then I think that's obviously the next step in making a movie, where you're trying to put together and bring on board a team and get enough people excited about it that it can be a movie that they want to get behind and put their names behind.
I think to build on that too, the importance for writers of actually making work and not just writing can't be overstated enough. There's an incredibly humbling thing which happens when you think you're writing the most hilarious scene in the world and you watch it and it's not funny at all and it's confusing and people don't know what's going on. And I think going through that process, animation's the perfect place to be able to learn your craft, because of the process of storyboarding and building an animatic and then recording it and adjusting. For several years you're going through this process of revision, which allows you to test ideas. I don't know how somebody who has not made a bunch of short films or something could jump into a live action film as their first thing. So you end up in a situation where if you get it wrong, that's what goes up on screen. And it's terrifying. Hats off to them. But for us, it was a wonderful kind of proving ground for doing our first movie, to be able to test that all the way through the process.
And I think that process is, and it sounds like on Paper Bag Princess, you guys had a similar thing, even though it was just at the script stage. But for us and for animation, because animation is so iterative, what we found is that the script was basically being written. It wasn't that we wrote the script, submitted it, and then that was the movie that got made. It was a 2.5-year process of writing and rewriting and trying new scenes and storyboarding them and going to the voice records, writing new lines for the actors, trying alt lines, alt jokes, that type of thing. And it builds and it builds. And I think that one of our approaches to writing that is becoming a bit more common now is it's not just a case of turning in a script and then that's the job of the writer ends. It's being at the edit, being at the voice record, doing that type of thing, being there for the entire process. I mean, we were writing on Escape from Planet Earth up until a day before our audio.
We were in the color correct. In fact, to add to that, we had locked picture, locked audio, and we got a call from Harvey that said, "I got Ricky Gervais to do a voice in the movie," and it was about to go to prints to be manufactured. Well, what was prints? Mostly digital, but it was about to go out to theaters, and we had to scramble at the very last minute to get together lines and be doing that. But the story is relevant because I think for people who haven't been through the process before, there's this idea that the script is something that's done, and in our experience, and I'm sure your experience, you're writing into the final edit slight tweaks of off-screen dialogue and all of this stuff. It's always a process that you're pushing through the whole thing. Interesting to hear about the Paper Bag Princess as well. It's certainly our experience that scripts aren't 3-month projects, and to hear that for any fledgling producers in the audience, that's certainly something to keep in mind as one thinks about trying to put together a movie, that these are long things that grow organically over time. And the first draft that comes in feels like you want to throw your hands in the air and go, this isn't working at all. And it takes people who have been through the process to trust this is great. We've got some good things here, but we're going to throw out most of this over and over and over again until we get something great at the end. And that was certainly our experience.
Did you get notes? I mean, were you doing this only the two?
Oh,
of
we
you
got
all by
notes.
Oh, notes deluxe. So yes.
Talk a little bit about notes and how you respond to notes.
You're
First
exactly
with
right.
rage.
So the
Right.
first step.
Rage starts. Right.
The first step is to nod and smile, and then you go and blow off steam, and then you go and say, actually, we can do 70% of these, and 30% of these are going to be a disaster. So let's pick our battles, and that's the other thing, is not all battles need to be fought right now. You go, we can let this thing tumble around a little bit, and hopefully they'll come around on this stuff that is not working, or we'll come around. Maybe we're wrong. Like that's.
And they often don't know why it's not working. They want to provide the solution, but they don't know why. They're just saying that character's no good, but in fact the problem might be a scene or two earlier, and they don't know. I mean, in my old age here, I just like
Use your mic.
I just type. Sorry, is it worried? I just type. I just take it down word for word because my ego is so interfering.
Yeah, that's
that I would not hear it properly.
Yeah.
So I try to get it down in their words.
I do the same thing.
And then I go and have some wine and don't think about it for a while, and I'll say, look, I can only make people feel what I feel. So I'm going to try to take this in as with as much positive energy as possible. But I'm not going to defend my choices right now because they say, well, it's boring. You say, I wanted it to be boring. It's about the notion of boredom. Yeah. It's like
So Bob ends up, he's a faster typer than me, so he ends up taking our notes in those situations, and his are fascinating because they have little editorial comments and like, what the heck are they thinking?
Are you kidding me? Like that, but it just.
Well, maybe we just quit. Actually, on one of them, it was fantastic. He just had in the middle of this notes document. This is being recorded, right? Ooh.
That's all right.
He just had a list of other jobs we could do. It's like plumber, firefighter. There's a whole list of things we could do.
Then they say, "Could you send over those notes?" And I
You're
said, "Just
I'll
need
have to
do
clean them up."
A little editing first."
Yeah,
but
that's right. But in terms of dealing with notes. The other part of that is frequently we found that working, again, with somebody like Harvey, part of what his job is, and I don't mean to speak for him, but he's the catalyst that wants to keep shaking the tree and make sure good fruit is falling from it. A lot of the times sometimes he has a specific note that it has to be exactly this, and you do that. But a lot of the time, he understands that this process is one of revision and tearing it down and building it up. And so a huge part of his job is just to keep shaking the tree and go, am I getting everything I can out of you guys? And do we need to hire, some punch-up writers to come in? And it's not even necessarily that they're going to solve all the problems. It's that they're going to come in and keep shaking the tree. This stuff is it's going to cause us to keep thinking and questioning, and the best ideas survive.
And on a production note with that, it feels like it sometimes can be worrisome if you're too literally sticking to notes, because, again, there are some that are certainly exact notes that need to be executed, but I think a lot of them are just more to get ideas moving and that type of thing. And it can be you can paint yourself into a corner from a production side if you have people that are basically going through with a spreadsheet saying, then this, then this, then this, then
tick
this.
Tick it off.
Because that can lead, it's more about thinking of the film as a whole, not just executing every single specific note that happened to be thrown out off the top of someone's head in a meeting, that type of thing.
Yeah, it is. As writers, it's your job to make sure the movie works in the end of the day. You're not just a robot checking off boxes. And if you are one, people will they'll say thank you so much for doing the notes, and then they'll hire somebody else that hands them back a movie that can be made. So.
Okay, that's great. Peter, how about over to you?
I'm coming at it. Is this on? It's on. I've got a third variety of production, and mine is where I just went ahead and after 10 years of working in the industry, made a short film. And by the way, Cal, I'm using your writer right now for that job too. So I may relate.
That's it.
To Bob occasionally. Come back. So anyway, so I'd worked 10 years down, or 7 years in the States, but I'd been in the industry for around 10 years, and I'd worked at Pixar, at ILM, and at Disney, and I'd seen the process of how those guys work, and I was really interested in doing something like directorial. So in around 2003, I quit my job and literally just said, you know what, I'm going to make a short film based off of a goofy idea I have about a squirrel who's a jerk, and that's all I had. And I sat down and started writing up these scripts, and you know, the little I knew about writing was only based off of the fact that I'd always watch Saturday Night Live and SCTV and type up scripts after I'd be recording it off the TV before VCRs, and I would literally just copy what they're saying and watch books where there's scripts and saying, oh, this is how it's written and this is what you do. So I thought I could just follow off that, and I did, because that's all I had, having not taken a script writing course or any kind of film course, because I had graduated from Sheridan, which was basically pure animation, and I think you guys went to Sheridan as well. Yeah. So, you know, boarding, drawing, animation, acting skills. I mean, we had concentrated on that. In terms of storytelling, there was very little. I don't know if it was in your year, but with us it was very little. Everything we learned was basically in the industry. So I started off that way, quit my job, started working on it. We built models. I boarded the whole thing, wrote the script like 10,000 times, changing the ideas. I mean, in the beginning, there was violence. Well, there was violence in the end of the short film, basically, if you see it.
You paid for this?
I paid for it myself. Yeah, I had enough money put aside where I could take a year off, because I'd gathered a bunch of money that I made in the States and just said, you know what, I'm going to invest in this for myself to just see if I can do it. And it wasn't that much of an expenditure. I mean, really, it was around $30,000, and that was mostly like, and living off of favors of people, right? Animators, asking for people's opinions. Like, I actually would go to the Second City comedy troupe and just go to them, hey, I'm just this guy writing a script. Can you guys punch this up for me? I'll give you the credit. And they would come in, and Dave Morrell would come in and just look at it and say, yeah, listen, I'll take 5 minutes of my time just to look the script over here. Throw a gag in here, throw a gag in here. And I would use some of that stuff into the film. So a lot of favors, a lot of people helped. In the end, the short film was made, and Dan Kretsch at DKP Studios said, hey, listen, I'll finish it off for you, because it looks like you still need to light it, right? So lighting is a process in CG where it's just that. You have to light and render the images. So he helped me with that. We got it done, and he had somebody help distribute it or send it out to the short film circuit. And the film got a little bit of notoriety because it won at SIGGRAPH as Best Animated People's Choice Award. It kept winning People's Choices Award, and it never won any kind of critical awards. It was purely audience awards, going like, it's funny, it was ridiculous, we loved it, and we'd get all these awards. So my story is going to end up being be careful what you wish for, because after that, it's like nothing happened with the short. It just stopped there, and I started. I actually went to work at Cookie Jar for Michael. Michael, great producer, by the way.
Good to know.
He was awesome. No, he was. He's very good, actually. I'll give you a story later about him. But what a great producer. Seriously, I've worked with a lot of producers, and this guy is hands-on and off at the same time. Anyway, but which usually most producers are just hands-on all the time, getting in your face. So anyway, what had happened was I worked at Cookie Jar for a bit, and then after that, got a call from Red Rover Korea, not Red Rover Toronto. I think there was a relationship. There was a relationship at one time before you were there, yeah. And they wanted to do a TV show, and I went on and started off as animation director, and the two directors left, so they gave me the show. So with a little help from another co-director, we finished the whole show. And in the meantime, the owner of Red Rover Korea would be telling me, look, we're going to make a feature film out of your surly squirrel thing. And I'd be like, sure, whatever. I mean, I've heard this so many times. Like, it was like from the awards, from when it went to SIGGRAPH, and I was getting calls from like Universal and Disney, and everyone would keep, all these agents were calling me up, and I was like, wow, it's going to be a feature. It's going to be a feature. It's going to be a TV show. Nothing happened. Literally nothing. It was years, like just 2-3 years, to the point where I just kind of like, I don't care, whatever. So when they told me they're going to make a feature of it, I was like, sure. Do I have a job? I need a job. I got a second kid now. It's like, I need money, so I'll do it. And it ended up happening. So when the TV show ended, they got serious. They said, we're going to make this feature film. And I went, okay. So I guess I get a writer, and they gave me a writer for a bit. And that writer, we didn't like the first draft, so we let that go. And then we got another writer in Lauren Cameron. Now, in the interim with these writers, I was saying to myself, you know what? I should know more about script writing other than this Second City copying of scripts. I should actually know more about writing. So the first thing I did is I had heard about Save the Cat. Now, look, I'm not saying that's the way to go or that's the industry standard, right? But I looked it over and I went, okay, I get that's basic. I get that. And then I met this other writer, and he said to me, again, another thing, the McGee book, the storybook. I don't know if you guys have read it, right? But this guy was like saying, look, if you're going to even write a script, you should at least know these tenets, right? So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go through this book. And I had the time. I had like 4 months. So I sat down with that book, and I went through it, I mean, line per line. And I would say, you know, when you read a book, sometimes you read a chapter, and you go, yeah, I get it. And you move on. I didn't. I went, no, man, you know what? I'm going to read that again till I get it. And I would copy the book, and I literally have annotated notes to it. Like I rewrote the book myself with my own words, so I understood everything. Now, a lot of help that's going to do when you're working on an animated feature film, but it was a beginning, right? But what it did was it set all these high standards for me, like, oh, it's going to be great, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to understand the characters and all that. But you're working on a feature film that there's so many other people involved helping you. So you're not going to get that direct vision that you really want. But I'll get to that later if there's any questions about that. But in the end, I worked with Lauren Cameron, who came on, and great writer, and he worked on Ratatouille, and he worked on Brother Bear and all that, and he came on, and we started working on it together. And every time I'd bring up any kind of McGee notes, the guy would be like, "What's that? I don't care." He'd be like, "Just you know what? Here's the way I do it, kid." And I was like, "Okay." So he went ahead, wrote the script, but like we said, the script, you know, first, second, third draft is only a placeholder for what's going to happen later, because again, you got to leave enough space for creativity to pop into that thing, whether it's going to be the board artists or your story guys or your actor or you as director later coming in and saying, you know what, we need to change this. So Lauren's script, again, changed, and I would go in every night sometimes and change stuff, especially when we were recording for actors. I'd rewrite stuff, especially for Liam Neeson. That was a big one because we didn't know we were going to get Liam Neeson. And when it was Liam Neeson, I rewrote everything from scratch. I just went, screw it, I'm just going to throw everything out and just rewrite it again. And then, you know, but again, it's too late at that point because you can always change these scripts, right? You could always get better. So in terms of financing and stuff, like you've always got people standing above you, watching what you're doing, making sure that their vision is coming across through you. Then at the same time, you got to maintain your own creative integrity. So there's this balancing act you're doing the whole way for me. I mean, we don't talk about producers a lot and financiers and distributors, but they really do have a huge influence on the film. I mean, we can go the John Cassavetes route and make our films by ourselves. Like I did the short film where it's kind of like, I don't care, man. I'm doing it myself. If I want birds to shit on a car, I'll do it. No one's going to stop me. But you know, when you're working on a feature film where there's lots of money involved, you have to make sure, like Hal was saying, where you walk that line, you got to be careful. It's kind of like, okay, man, you want that? Fine, I'll get that in there for you. I'll give you 70%. I'm still getting my 30. It always depends on which way things are going. If they laugh, they laugh. If they don't, you got to change it. Even though you thought it was funny in the story room, it's not going to be funny up on screen.
How much do you feel is your movie now?
I literally now feel like it's 50 to 60% my movie, and it's 40% other ideas.
I think just to weigh in on that, one of the real things is people ask me that question all the time about Escape, and the real answer is if you want to be a movie director. You have to direct movies. You don't sit at your house and think about this fantastic thing that's nobody is ever going to see. So part of that is, the day we finished Escape, apart from being completely burnt out, I felt like, okay, now I'm ready to make a movie. Now I know so many things that I would do differently next time. And I think, so it's kind of a dodge of that question. But the point being, people go, well, how did you sacrifice, why didn't you stick strong to what you wanted to do? You go, I did as much as I could, and then you decided you wanted to finish making a movie and get to keep doing this. And I think part of that is respecting that it's not your $40 million. And
exactly.
And
it's not your $40 million.
You can encourage other people to take all sorts of risks, but it's not your money on the line.
The bigger the budget, the more you have to listen.
Absolutely.
Precisely. But that's a good point Cal was making about if you're sitting around just thinking up the ideas, it's actually the biggest education is actually just doing it yourself. Actually just going, you know what, I'm just going to grab a camera, get a bunch of friends, and just shoot something and see what it feels like just to do that. Like that short film was eye-opening just to get me, get that foot in the door. But, without that, I don't think I could have done the feature film even. Just that malleable experience of handling people, and basically everyone's going to be asking you questions constantly.
You also discovered your own voice in it, right? You had your own style. You found your style,
in the
and that's what
independent.
got you the job.
In the independent, yes, when you're doing it independently. But when you're doing it for other people, it's another. I mean, your voice is in there, but it's just squeaking through. I think it's just getting there. Hello, I'm here. You may see it. Like I watch the film and I go, yeah, that's me. That's me up there. Just for a second.
That particular gag.
Just for a second, yeah. There's a gag or a glance or a character just acts a certain way, or like it could be just like the most subtlest moment, and you just go, that's me. But overall, I mean, it's the accumulation of these moments that make the film and creates the tone and the language, right? So you are part of that language, but in the end, there's so many other people shoving things in there. Mm-hmm. Cranking it open and shoving their jokes in there, and you're going, this is not going to work, this is not going to work, but they just shove it in there still. And somehow the film works cohesively. And I learned a lot of things where sometimes you can shove an idea in there and go, wow, you know what, that idea that I hated, that I despised from the distributor, that I thought was the goofiest idea, or like, who is this writer, this guy coming out of nowhere? He doesn't know what he's doing. And it works, it's funny. And it happens a lot. And it's knowing, again, walking that fine line between yourself and appeasement, because that's literally the game you're playing.
And there's no question this is a collaborative art. Right?
It's
not you by yourself in a studio painting a picture.
Absolutely not.
And I think it's about getting some runs on the board, too, is you've got a movie that's done very well for the people that you made it for, as is ours. You get more voice in the next one. Now people go, okay, it's not as risky to listen to you based on what you've done. One other thing worth mentioning, I had no idea that Peter had shelled out for his own film. Bob and I, separately, not together, have also both spent about $30,000 on personal films before we got here. And I think it's funny that's a consistent through line, is just you have to start making something. You can't sit there and just theorize about it.
It's interesting that it also distinguishes filmmaker from itinerant director in a funny kind of a way, because working for studios, working in television, you are making somebody else's movie, no question about it. Whereas doing your own, you are making your movie first. You can, after you've done that, make your movie in television. But if you're starting off and that's your entry into it, as opposed to going off and making a movie that is your own, it's a different start.
My experience is quite different in that, I worked for free and did all my own stuff at the beginning, and then did a little bit bigger, and then did a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger. And I worked with the Weinsteins, and I know that story, like wildness. But so, and now this is by far the largest. We'll see if we pull it off. I hope so. But it isn't. But you guys have had this amazing experience of just stepping in at the top, which is, what was your budget? What was your budget?
Officially, it was 40.
This is the same.
Well, I'll tell you without getting into details, is that it was 40, including the first round, which went on for several years before we got there. So I
So
won't
it's
talk about
40
30
to
or something.
recoup, but you didn't spend 40. You know.
we didn't spend 40 to get. They may have. I'm not sure.
Can I just before we open it up to questions, just one small thing that I've noticed. I mean, these three projects are all American money is absolutely necessary. Is it possible to do this in Canada?
I certainly have an answer to that one, locked and loaded.
Go.
If anybody who's in the animation or effects business has seen or heard about the Life of Pi debacle, where the effects company that was involved with that won the Oscar for this went bankrupt while they were winning the Oscar. This was a huge deal, and it really underlines the fact that there's no purely service business that can survive, because it's just a race to the bottom with all of these people being able to do it in emerging countries. We'll never be able to stay alive doing that. And I think Rainmaker, obviously everything in Michael's world, or most of the stuff in your world, ARC in Toronto, all of these companies are switching their game plans to start thinking the way to survive here is we have to participate in the upside when we, we can, as long as we can just stay alive, when we make a Finding Nemo, we got to set ourselves up for the next 5 movies to be able to take risks and keep doing this. So I think, yes, absolutely. And from what I see from where I'm sitting, a lot of Canadian companies are getting very serious about that, because they don't want to be beholden to everyone else for their survival.
Very encouraging. That's great.
Well, yeah, the guy who did our budget, David Coatsworth, had just done Ender's Game. And he had the experience of having the effects budget be not transparent to him. They could just charge you anything, and it just made it for a very unstable world, because you just didn't know, if you changed this shot, what would it cost? But I feel really comfortable in a way with Michael in that we're in-house. It's transparent. And
the question about can you do it in Canada is interesting. I think that to a limited degree, I think it's true, even at the higher budgets, because if you look at how American movies are financed today, it's, wealthy people who are financing movies. So there's a Canadian who's financing movies through a company called Participant in the States, through his earnings in Silicon Valley. But, it's essentially wealthy heirs who are doing a big part of the financing now. There's venture capital money, there's lots of different money. But I think, given the fact that in the end we are a small country, having access to global capital really shouldn't make a difference where the capital comes from. The interesting question is, what's the role for the American studio? And today the role for the American studio is the company that can place a movie into the American marketplace and create that initial opening in market that drives the global value of your film. Quite often, they're not financing their own movies. They're financing a very small part of their own movie slates, and it is being financed by alternative, sources, which, are accessible to anybody. But generally, the thing that everybody wants to know is, how are you going to get your movie opened in the U.S.? How is that going to drive the international value? So that has, at the end, become kind of the main contribution of an American studio.
And I think to add to that, I don't want to be misunderstood in saying when, yes, we can do it in Canada, it's absolutely in partnership with these big American studios. We just can't put a movie into theaters in America. That's a kind of a closed system. So it's absolutely in partnership. What I was implying is, and I think we're on the same page, but Canadian ownership, and that's what I think you were talking about.
Yes.
In terms, we have to participate as part of that. We're not just service makers. Yeah.
Absolutely. And ultimately, the real value as a Canadian owner is in controlling the distribution rights. So ultimately, it's going to be about how one can access, the U.S. theatrical market without the studios. And the studios, because the world has moved to digital, and so many movie theaters, are running movies digitally, in a sense, as somebody was explaining to me last night, movie theaters are now big TV sets. And the ability to take a movie, and if you basically put a movie into, say, 3 cities and did enormous box office, because you're delivering digitally, you can actually switch over a lot of theaters very quickly and easily to take advantage of the buildup you're doing. So I think we're going to see distribution patterns change and the access to the American marketplace change, because these studios that now only have that actually don't have something that has a high barrier to entry anymore. The biggest barrier to entry is how are you going to finance, the prints and advertising. The prints are now inexpensive, and it's really the question of how you're going to advertise and get people to see your movie. And again, a lot of that money is coming from alternative sources. The studio's not wanting to invest even in P&A. So we're in a moment of change. We're in a moment where a lot is possible. One of the interesting things I learned from Telefilm Canada recently, when we were talking to them about this movie being a $50, $60 million picture, they said, gee, there's not been a Canadian movie that's really Canadian that has had that kind of budget. And just the other day, they were telling me that they've actually now got some other people telling them that they're going to make $50 million movies here. And so we're seeing a change. And again, when you look at this area of family movies that we're talking about, kids' pictures and family pictures, these are some of the best performing box office pictures in the world. And this is an area that we can play in. We have become, over many years, the best producers of kids' television in the world. And now it's not a hard sweep for us to become the best producers of kids and family movies. So I see that transition as being natural. The next DreamWorks is likely to be Canadian.
Very encouraging. So I think we have a couple of, about a minute and a half for questions. Anybody or answers? Does anybody have any comments? Doesn't have to be a question. Comments or questions? Any burning desires that need to be, or?
That's right.
Hi, thanks. Just to clarify what you were just talking about, you were saying that as Canadian companies that are just service providers getting ownership in projects that they're being hired to make?
No, I'm talking about from the get-go, they're putting together the projects. And I think service work is a great part of that, of keeping a studio open. But it can't ultimately be everything that comes through your door. Otherwise, every year, your margins decrease until you close. That's just what happens when you're doing strictly service work. And so this is about them going, we've got our service work stream, and we've also got our original content stream. And most of these studios now are starting to get together financing and stuff as well, so that they can go to the US distributors and go, what we need is your commitment to put this into theaters and advertise it in America. We'll pay for the movie. Here are all the things, all ready to go. Are you interested? And so that's what I'm seeing, at least.
Thanks.
And to be purely service, your castle's built on sand.
Yes.
Right? The dollar changes and you've lost everything. Someone else gets a better tax credit.
You watch everybody flee your province and then flee back.
Look at New Brunswick. That's exactly what happened. An industry built, the government changed, the industry ran to Halifax.
It's like it's a funny little, all these movie people scurrying over the globe following these tax credits right now. Right?
Or back and forth across the country, which is, it's Winnipeg, it's Winnipeg. Let's.
Hi, just a quick question. How much of your money can be American, you think, and it still be considered a Canadian film?
Well, that doesn't affect the Canadianness of the movie.
All of it.
And I mean, you look at a movie like Juno, or you look at a lot of these ones, even Titanic. I've heard people argue that could be Canadian, but is there not rules where if the producer or a certain amount of money has to come from Canada?
Not really, because when you look at movies, people can structure around. That's an issue. That's a structuring issue. The truth of the matter is that the real question is the ownership of the program, right? And then, how you do on the points, etc. And it's not a big issue.
There are different scales for different media. Tax credits is one thing. CRTC is another thing. At no point, though, does anyone question the source of the money, just the control of the project.
That's our experience too. Is the control is the defining thing. We had Canadian writer, director, producer, and all of our production done in Canada, and Escape is not a Canadian movie because the Weinsteins own the content.
But it's a Canadian movie.
Well, we like to think so.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is. I mean, there's two answers to it. It was like, who owns, where's the money, and then where's the heart of it? And the heart of it is Canadian.
I've spent a lot of years in Canadian television, and I can tell you internationally, there is such a thing as a Canadian sensibility. Regardless of who controls it, you can tell this is made by Canadians. There is that way
Juno
of
is
thinking.
Canadian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Monique. I'm from the Netherlands. And I was just wondering, listening to your stories about the importance about the American studios getting involved, which I understand, how are you looking at Europe at the moment as possible co-production partners or distribution? Do you see opportunities there, or?
So certainly there are opportunities. Canada and Europe have co-produced on many movies and many TV shows. It's just a function of, do you have the right project that works for co-production? And do you want to do a co-production? And what does it mean? But clearly it is one of the forms of financing. So on Paper Bag Princess, we may co-produce, but a co-production isn't going to get the half of the $50 million budget necessarily, but it'll contribute maybe another third of that, thus making it easier to finish the financing.
Would be your last resort to get the final financing? Are you?
It really depends on the production. So if it depends upon whether there is a natural co-production. So in the past, I've co-produced a Babar movie or series of Babar movies and a Pippi Longstocking movie and other projects where it was natural to co-produce because of the nature of the material. Yeah. So I think often the material that you're working on sort of dictates it. And I think Peter's project, The Nut Job, was probably was it a Korean movie or a Korean co-production? Co-production. So there's a co-production just sitting there.
Okay, thanks.
Or you could just shout.
Yeah, I'll just shout. I don't like microphones.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Peter, my heart broke when you said that the studios were calling you and they all want to make a feature and agents were calling you and then nothing happened. Why?
Nothing. I don't know why. It's like they say, okay, how about like I would get a call from Nickelodeon and they'd say we want to consider this as a show, and I'd be like, okay, great, just let me know what I need to do. And you'd wait and wait and wait, and no one was calling. Or you'd get Universal saying, we were considering this for a movie, and you'd be like, okay, great. And it's like, you'd wait, and then you'd call back maybe 2 months. You don't want to be like, if it's the beginning of a relationship, you're thinking, I don't want to be too desperate. So you'd be like waiting, and then you'd call and say, hey, can I speak to Julie? And you're like, oh yeah, she left and went to 20th Century Fox. Oh, okay. So she's moving on. And it's like, I guess producers' lives are very minimal, or I think it's like combat. I think they just survive for a little bit and then they move on to another place. But anyway, the point is that I think a lot of that stuff goes around, right? There's interest, but if nothing happens, nothing happens, and you just let it go.
So who released Nut Job, by the way, and how did the movie get to the distributor?
The release was internationally, it's the Weinsteins, and domestically it was Open Road. And what happened was, while we were working on the film, my execs pushed the film to Hollywood distribution, to the studios there, and they looked at it and they were like, okay, we'll offer this, or we'll take this territory, blah, 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 all that stuff. And during the negotiation, it was Open Road, I think, that won and got the best deal for the film, but they were really interested in it. But then it's funny, once they get involved, they will get in there and start tweaking, and which is fine, which is great. I mean, again, it did wonders. I just wish, you want to get that distribution deal though earlier. I'd say business-wise, it's the only business thing I can throw out there is that if the sooner they're in there, like with you guys working with the Weinsteins in advance, you can get all the trouble and all the issues out of the way. Where we got it in the last 4 months, like just a barrage of changes. Anyway, that's not answering your question, but basically, yeah, I waited a long time, but nothing happened. And again, when Red Rover wanted to finance the film, I was like, sure. Not going to happen.
Add to that, we've actually had a situation in selling a script where people were really excited, and the answer that came back is basically like, don't sell it to anyone else. Just call us if somebody else wants to buy it. And then that's how, and I think it sounds like the same thing is nobody wants to miss out, but nobody wants to pull the trigger unless everyone's pulling the trigger.
6-month option thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do with you, right? They say, oh, wow, let me hold on to this for 6 months. I'll hold on to this for 6 months. And then in 6 months, if you want to, shop it around, just let us know. And then that elapses, and you're sitting with, like, nobody even caring about it. So, I mean, I don't know if
because
the
heat's off.
I think that's true in any faction of any aspect of the
of life, in fact, right?
So from a producer point of view, what I would say is that you probably needed to be allied with an aggressive, proactive producer, because that's what the producer does, and that's what Red Rover in Korea, Korean Red Rover did, is they essentially became producers and produced your movie and got it into the marketplace, got it financed, got it made. And, it's hard to be the creative guy behind a project and necessarily also be the person who's going to market it and produce it, etc.
Unless you're me, and I'll call up and they'll say, so have you read it? Is any response? And they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, he's on a call. I'll say, I'll wait. It's okay. And they'll say, no, it could be a while. I said, it's fine, I'll wait. They said, no, I'm really sorry. It really could be half an hour. I said, it's fine, I'll wait. Fairly often they'll pick up.
It's a scene from.
You have to be fairly entertaining when they finally do, and they don't charge you with stalking. But
so I think we've run out of time, and I want to thank our wonderful panel. And here's Christophe. Great.
Thank you so much, guys. What a wonderful panel. Thank you, Peter, Michael, Patricia, Peter, Bob, and Cal.